Today I'm going to be starting a reading vlog reading Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. I am a very big fan of Paul Tremblay. I have read several books from him and I've really enjoyed them. First I read A Cabin at the End of the World, gave that 5 stars. That was the first book I read from him, and that was a book that really kickstarted me reading a lot more horror books as well. I think I read it at the beginning-ish of 2020, and ever since then I started reading a lot more horror than I ever had before in my life. Also read A Head Full of Ghosts from him. This was also a 5-star. And I have read The Pallbearers Club, and this I think I gave a 4-star. So everything I've read from him has received either a 4 or a 5-star for me. So I'm very excited to read Horror Movie. I have a feeling I'm gonna like it because I have such a good track record with him. And as authors start to become my favorite authors, I find myself wanting to capture the experience reading their books so that I can always look back on them as I read more of their books. And I like to think about stack ranking them, and it's just nice to have the memory preserved. So I'm going to be taking you through my journey reading Horror Movie. I'm also reading this because I am a co-host for my friend Elizabeth's book club, Elizabeth from Reading Riley, and this is the pick for the month of July. Gabby from Gabby Reads is also joining in on that discussion, and I'm very excited to chat about it with all of them. So by the time you're seeing this video, that book club should be live, so I'll have the video linked down below so you can check that out for our full discussion on the book. If I had to predict how I think I'm going to feel about it, I would say I think it's going to be a 4 or 5 because all the other books I've read from Paul Tremblay have been a 4 or 5, and I'm hoping this keeps up that trend. So I started Horror Movie last night and I made it 56 pages in. Wanted to give a first impression. It's going by so fast. There are parts of this book that are reading a script, so 56 pages goes more like the pace of like what 35-ish pages would probably be. This is what the script looks like. And I did not refresh myself on the synopsis of this book before jumping in because I don't like to do that. So I've been discovering what it's about as I've been reading, and you are following a past timeline, a present timeline, and then reading a movie script. In the past, there was this movie being made called Horror Movie. You're reading the script of that movie. It never actually made it fully through to production, and it never actually really came out, but there was this cult following around it. It got really popular because of that, I guess. It's this mysterious film that never was. And now in the present day, other directors are trying to pick it back up, get access to the script, and finally reboot the movie and have it fully come out. And you have a main character who's connected to both the past and the present. So far, I'm pretty sure he is unnamed. He goes by the Thin Kid, which is the character he plays in the movie. The main characters you're following so far include Valentina, who was the director of the film back in the day, Cleo, who wrote the script, and then this main character who they call Weird Guy in real life, and then his character is called the Thin Kid in the script. In the present day, the Thin Kid is being brought on as an associate producer. Every time directors want to pick it up, they want him to be involved, they want him to be in the reboot, playing his role again. So he seems to be the only one still connected to it in the present day. I don't know what happened to Valentina and Cleo. I don't know if the synopsis gives that away. I like not knowing. I like letting that mystery unfold ahead of me, so I'm not gonna look into it. And then the script that you're reading is the script that Cleo wrote of the movie called Horror Movie, and she describes the script as being very purposefully unconventional. The movie is following 4 teens who are exploring this school, and I don't really know what's even happening in the movie. There hasn't been a lot of development in that yet, but the characters in the movie are played by Valentina and Cleo, and they are also named Valentina and Cleo wrote the script based on things that had happened in her real life growing up. So there's a lot of meta-ness to it, and so far I'm liking that, because if the whole point was to have the characters in the script emulate those characters, it would have probably just been confusing to give them different names. You would be like, wait, is Valentina this one or this one? It's just more straightforward to have them be the exact same name. So I'm cool with that so far. It's not hard to uncover the meta-ness of it because it's very clear when you're reading a script and when you're reading the main character telling you the story. Something clearly happened to where this film never got fully made back in the day. I think that's a mystery we're gonna be solving. We're gonna be seeing stuff happen in the present day, and we're gonna be seeing what the movie was even about. I'm very intrigued so far. I am liking it. I'm also listening to the audiobook when I can. I can do a tandem read. I'm listening to the audio as well, because when Elizabeth started reading this book, she pointed out that she was having a weird experience finding like mistakes and not knowing if they were intentional mistakes, and also just the production of the audiobook was weird. So I wanted to also listen to it so that I could have my own opinion on that and then bring that to the discussion when we have that later this week. I'm also noticing discrepancies, and in in the reading of the script, sometimes the script is being read in the audiobook like it's a table read where everyone's just sitting around a table reading their parts. You hear them make mistakes that aren't written in the text. Like they'll say something and then they'll say it again, or they'll say something as they're reading it and then they'll say it as if they're like acting it out, but it's not written twice in the book. And then you'll also hear them turning pages, but then sometimes the script parts are read like it's a fully produced movie. Like you can hear footsteps, you can hear doors opening. It's like they're acting, and there's no consistency to it, and there's no way to tell when it's going to do one or the other based on what you're reading on the page. At one point you also hear a guy clear his throat. That was really weird. So I don't know what's going on there, but I'm going to try to keep note of the discrepancies and see if I can figure out what it's doing, if it's intentional and what it might be trying to do or say. So far, all I know is I'm liking it and it's going by very fast, so I'm excited to keep reading more today. Quick midway-ish update. It's a little bit slow right now, a little bit slow moving, but I feel like all Paul Tremblay books get a little slow and boring kind of for a period of time, and then it does something really satisfying. And I still like the concept and the structure and what this is doing, but I'm ready for like some new information or for it to all feel like it's building somewhere. Right now it kind of feels like not the same thing over and over again, but it doesn't feel like the plot's advancing very much. So gonna keep reading tonight. Hopefully things improve a bit. I finished Horror Movie last night and now I'm ready to talk about it. I will first be giving a non-spoilery final thoughts and review, and then I'm going to go into spoilers. There's not a significant amount to spoil in this book, but I want to talk about the themes and things which require talking about the actual events that happen. But this is not a very plot-heavy book. It's not a very character-driven book either. It's kind of a vibes-driven book. What I got out of this most was this feeling of unease. It kind of reminded me of a movie that I have seen recently, not necessarily in plot or structure, but in the way I experienced the movie and the way I experienced this book. And that is the movie I Saw the TV Glow. That is a recent horror movie that I feel like you're either gonna really like or you're just not gonna get it. It's a very vibes-driven movie. It made me very uncomfortable and very like existential dready while watching it. And that's kind of how I felt while reading this book, especially reading the script portions really reminded me of that movie, because that movie feels a little directionless, confusing, bizarre, unconventional. That's how the script of this movie feels as well. It just like starts something where you're following these four teens, and I never told you what happened. I don't know if the synopsis tells you what happens. Okay, not particularly, but as the movie goes on, it just gets increasingly bizarre. And then what's going on in the book is that the lines between reality and the movie are sort of blurring as well. And that's kind of the whole thing. I think Paul Tremblay writes a very certain flavor of books, and I really like them, but I totally understand how they are not the most conventional and how it might not be something that you enjoy. I could see someone reading this and thinking it's very boring because of the structure of it, but I liked it. I think this would be a kind of weird place to begin with Paul Tremblay. In terms of rating, I think I'm going to give this a 4-star. So still true to this day, every Paul Tremblay I've read has been either a 4 or a 5-star. I realized after filming the first clip, I also forgot to tell you, I've also read Disappearance on Devil's Rock, or Disappearance at Devil's Rock. That one was also a 4-star for me. So this is definitely not my favorite Paul Tremblay book. I don't know if it's my least favorite, even though it's a 4. Like, if something's got to be the least favorite of how things stack rank. It's kind of different. Like, it has flavors that feel like the Pallbearers Club a little bit. The ambiguity of it feels similar to his other works that are usually pretty ambiguous, but all of his books do feel kind of distinct and different to me. I think if you've read from Paul Tremblay before and you've enjoyed what you've read from him, you should definitely pick this up. I think if you haven't read from Paul Tremblay before and you're wondering if this is a good place to begin, I don't know that that's what I would recommend starting with. I might recommend starting with something like A Head Full of Ghosts, or if you like stuff that has sort of a classic horror feel, then Disappearance at Devil's Rock might be a good place to begin. So that's wrapping up my non-spoilery thoughts, and now I'm going to jump into some spoilery thoughts. Okay, so the gist of what happens in this book is you're mainly following Valentina, Cleo, and the main character, who I am pretty sure remains unnamed the entire book. I didn't catch a name, and it definitely felt intentional. There was one point where they almost said his name, and I think it started with the letter A, and then they stopped, so pretty sure they remain unnamed. But he goes as the Thin Kid. That's his character name. In real life, they call him the Weird Kid. For the purpose of this, I'm just gonna call him the Thin Kid. And as you're getting more details of the script and what's going on in real life, this is mostly the script and then flashbacks of when they were originally filming the book. The setup is that they're going to be rebooting it, and the Thin Kid is now all grown up, and he is the only survivor. He's the only person right now who's still alive from the original people who made this movie. They all died in different ways, and I guess that's kind of what makes it a cursed film, because it never made it fully through to production, and then all the people who worked on it died. I think I mentioned before, maybe not, but as the Thin Kid's filming, he's not really an actor. Valentina and Cleo just kind of find him and then ask him if he wants to be a part of it, because another guy was supposed to do it, and then they ended up having creative differences and he was no longer going to do it. And this actor doesn't have many lines, so it's pretty easy to fill him into this role. Valentina only wants to give him the scenes to read right before he shoots them, so he hasn't read the full script. So the script is broken up through the text, and then you're kind of also reading about how it was filmed at the time in reality, following a little bit of a chronological way. It jumps around a little bit, and then you get some pieces that is present day as they're trying to reboot the film, but that's not a very significant portion of the book. In the script, Cleo, Valentina, Carson, and the Thin Kid, these are all their character names as well, are 4 teenagers, and Valentina, Cleo, and Carson kind of bully the Thin Kid throughout the script. They take him to this abandoned school, they put him in the supply closet, they make him wear this green mask, which I think was a crocodile, and then they just leave him there, and then he's like this missing kid, and their parents are asking like, oh, do you know where your friend is? They're like, oh, I don't know, like probably okay, but they just leave him there, and he just goes along with it, and then he undergoes a lot of abuse from them. They come and they throw things at him. At one point they cut off his finger, they burn him with cigarettes. They're just doing a lot of mean things to him, and he's just kind of taking it. And as all that's happening, the mask is kind of like melding into him, and so you're like, is he becoming the creature? Is he becoming a monster? In reality, the guy who's playing the Thin Kid is also kind of potentially becoming the character a little bit. And there's even a part at the very end where he's like fully blown a monster, and he kills the new guy who's playing the Thin Kid in the reboot. Like fully crocodile chomps him and eats him. So the book is very ambiguous. It's gonna be a lot to unpack. There's a lot of different interpretations I think you could take, even so much as to the ending. Paul Tremblay like just poses a lot of options of what could happen in the end. He doesn't even definitively end it a certain way. He's like, oh, it could have ended this way or this way or this way. Like, you'll have to watch the movie to see, because it's all about, you know, the movie being made. What I think this book was trying to get at, if I'm like getting a message away from this book, some of the main things it felt like to me is it kind of felt like Paul Tremblay was holding up this concept of the horror genre in front of the audience and examining why we like horror, what we like about it, what we get away from it, how we approach the genre, how we critique the genre. And instead of saying anything about it and him coming to his own conclusions and delivering that within the book, it's kind of like he just held it up. He's like, okay, look at this and take away from it what you want to take away from it. That's not going to be enjoyable for everyone, because some people don't like that much ambiguity. I don't mind it because I like Paul Tremblay's writing. I really like, I love his writing. I love his writing style, his tone. He sometimes is a little cheeky. I love his characters. His books just, I'm so immersed in them when I'm reading them. He's just built a lot of trust with me as an author. Like, I always know I'm gonna have a good experience, even if the concept's kind of odd. And I really like the risks he takes, and that he's not afraid to do things that are not as conventional. But I can totally see the other side of the coin, where you're like, what is this book about? I don't get it. I also have to imagine some of this having to do with creating a movie had to have come from his experience recently with A Cabin at the End of the World, getting a film adaptation and him being involved in some way in that production, and then probably having some takeaways from that about what it's like to create a movie and like some of the dangers and the ethics behind that. Maybe even some thoughts about like tortured artists in a way, and like, is it worth being tortured for your art? Where is the line drawn for that? And then my big thing I took away from this, and that I think if Paul Tremblay was trying to say anything, what I think he was trying to say is that horror can be so personal, and that's why it doesn't always work for everyone. That's why someone can read this book and have a great time with it, or read this and think it is super boring. That's why someone can watch a particular horror movie like I Saw the TV Glow and get a really meaningful message out of it. Other people are just not as impacted. I've seen a lot of discussion lately about Longlegs, which I have not seen the movie yet. Don't spoil anything for me. But Longlegs was marketed as like the scariest horror movie of the year. And then I've seen a lot of people saying, well, that's not scary. And I think what Paul Tremblay was pulling out is that horror can be so personal, because Cleo's character, she wrote the script of the horror movie. She's like, this is not conventional. It's unorthodox, but this is the story that I want to tell. This is the movie I want to make. And even within the script, there were moments where she was kind of proactively getting ahead of audience critique of the film within the script itself and saying like, this is how the audience will be feeling. This is what the audience will be thinking. People aren't going to like this. People are going to get up and go to the bathroom at this point, which was kind of interesting. And then there's also this discussion in the book at one point where the thin kid is talking to Cleo, and there's certain pieces of this that you know were inspired by Cleo's real life. You know that she actually had an abandoned school that her and Valentina used to go hang out at. The mask that the character wears is a mask that she actually found. And then there's this whole thing with Cleo's character in the movie where when she's walking up the stairs, she puts her hands in her pockets, and she does it because she wants to die, kind of, and she thinks that's a really passive way to increase the odds of her death, that if she fell down the stairs and her hands were in her pocket, she'd be more likely to die, but she's not like pushing herself down the stairs. It's a whole emotional thing she's gone through and thought about like being in the shower and thought about putting soap on the floor, but she's like, that's too active, but you know. Anyway, there's this whole thing about that in her character in the script, and the thin kid asks her, like, do you actually want to die? Is that really like how you feel? And then she's talking about how all the characters are kind of a piece of herself, and then the thin kid at that point is like, that's what I'm kind of worried about. I'm kind of worried that I don't exist, that I'm just a figment of your imagination and just this like piece of you. And I was like, oh my god, are we about to do something crazy and meta here where the thin kid actually is not a person at all, which would align with him being unnamed. And so I was thinking like, is the thin kid actually Cleo? And this is like a piece of her telling her story. But Cleo's definitely dead, it seems, because Cleo dies making the movie. In the end, there's this chainsaw scene, and it's important to know about her putting her hands in her pockets because she ends up pulling the chainsaw towards her and puts her other hand in her pocket, and then that's how he ends up killing her. And that's the big reveal of the book that you've kind of been leading up to the whole time, is whatever happened to Cleo. So anyways, and all those layers, like what Cleo is writing is personal to her. Her characters represent her in different ways. She's thinking about the audience's reaction and how this is going to be personal for everyone, and it may work for you and it may not. And then the story becomes so overwhelmingly personal for the thin kid because he really embodies his character, and it kind of takes over his whole life. So that's kind of what I'm taking away from it. I'd be really curious to hear, if you've read this book, what you think about it and what themes and things that you pulled out of it. If you're going to include spoilers down below, just make sure to give a spoiler warning so that anyone who wants to avoid those, make sure that they don't read those down below. But definitely let me know your thoughts about it and we can chat about it down below. And don't forget, by the time you're watching this, there will be an entire live discussion that I will have done with Elizabeth and Gabby, so I'll have that linked down below as well, so you can go check that out to hear more. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!